is Keys to the Shop, episode 255, The Triumph of Black Brazilians in Coffee, with Phyllis Johnson. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. If you're new to the show, welcome. There's a lot to go over. There's over 400 episodes that have been published over the last 4 years. But if you go to keystotheshop.com, all the episodes live on the episodes page. And also, if this show has been really helpful for you and impactful for you and your business, I would really appreciate you considering giving us a 5-star rating or review over at iTunes. That helps the visibility of the show, gets the content out there a lot more. And a big thank you to those of you who have already left ratings and reviews. Now, I want to let you know that Keys to the Shop offers consulting, coaching, and training for you and your business and your team. If you're just getting started in opening a coffee shop and you need someone to help guide you through the process, get started on the right path, we can help you there, as well as if you are an established coffee business owner and you want to improve your operations, you need an assessment of your shop and your business, you're in the market to scale your business or just make things more excellent. There's a lot of ways that Keys to the Shop can help you do that, either in person or remotely. I would encourage you to reach out. Chris@keystotheshop.com is the email. We can set up a free call just to talk about what's going on in your neck of the woods and how Keys to the Shop Consulting might be able to come alongside and help you thrive as a coffee business owner. Again, the email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, Chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is a specialty coffee equipment supplier, one of the best in the world, because not only do they curate an amazing selection of equipment from all over the globe, but they are also invested heavily in getting you the right equipment for your context, whether that's a drive-through, a stand, or a brick and mortar. The people over at Prima Coffee are all about equipping you for success. And when you go to the website, prima-coffee.com, you will find amazing amounts of resources, too, that will help you learn about coffee, learn about pouring latte art, learn about the equipment as well. Again, they love coffee people, and it shows with the services they provide you. When you go to this website, prima-coffee.com/keys, when you check out, you can use the code KEYS5 and get 5% off your entire order. Again, to get 5% off your order, just go to prima-coffee.com/keys and enter the code KEYS5 when you're checking out. A very generous offer from the people who are all about helping you find success in your business, Prima Coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. Plant-based beverages are on fire. I mean, there's probably cafes all over the world where it's the number one thing ordered over milk. And that's not really going to change, I don't think, over time. I think we're going to see it increase. And what you select to serve your customers becomes more and more important. And for my money and my experience, I think the Pacific Barista Series is the gold standard of offerings for plant-based options in your cafe, whether you're talking about the almond, soy, oat, rice, coconut, or hemp. The product can take the heat from steaming. It produces amazing texture for latte art, and it keeps the balance of the beverage focused on coffee. And the reason it performs so well is because Pacific gets a lot of feedback from the barista community, which is really the community that they're producing these things for. So you truly get a performance plant-based beverage with the Barista Series. Go to their website, pacificfoodservice.com, to learn more. And if you really want to give your customers the best plant-based options, then my advice is that you should be serving the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, everybody. Well, today we have a very special episode and a guest who I really enjoy talking to. We're having a conversation with the author of the new book, The Triumph, Black Brazilians in Coffee. Phyllis is the founder and president of BD Imports, a green coffee importing company, and also the founding director for the Coffee Coalition for Racial Equity. And over the years has been a tireless supporter of racial and gender equity, doing a lot of work with the International Women's Coffee Alliance. And Phyllis was a past guest on our show as we were talking about diversity in coffee. In this conversation today, though, we're going to be talking about her latest book, highlighting 2 Black Brazilian coffee farming families and their stories of triumphing over the odds against them in a country where traditionally Black people in coffee We're simply sharecroppers and workers. And in this conversation, we not only talk about the impetus for this book and Phyllis's thinking behind doing this book, but also the topics surrounding the content of this book and what it means for us in coffee, especially for those of us who are in more traditionally consuming countries in the global north, as we consider things like marginalization in coffee farming communities, as well as marginalization of people in our own communities. There's a lot of correlation and parallels here, and the topics are very relevant, especially in 2020. And as we enter into the new year, having this conversation about representation, visibility, opportunity, and really coming alongside people and helping build momentum to help those things become more of a reality for them, especially considering that we are able to do what we do in coffee in the shop and with our roasteries, all, because of the labor of those who labor in anonymity. And Phyllis's work in this book and in everything else that she's involved with does a great job of highlighting this need. So without saying anything else here, let's get right to the interview. I'm excited to share this conversation on Black Brazilians in Coffee with Phyllis Johnson. Well, Phyllis, thank you so much for being a guest on the show again. So glad to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. It's, we're at the end of the year, so it feels like we're on the home stretch. So yeah, I'm doing fine.
Yeah, so much hope for January. Ugh. Congratulations on this new book, The Triumph. It seems like a triumph in and of itself.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It was kind of a last minute idea, to be honest. I always think about writing books, but as an importer, you always you look at the farmers you're working with and you say, okay, I'm going to do this one-page flyer on them so the roasters will know about the coffee. I'll get some good pictures. And then I thought, nah, this story deserves its own book. So that's kind of how it swirled around in my head.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point because we do tend to write about coffee a lot when we're doing it for marketing purposes, or we write these dossiers on the farm and the people, but obviously your book gets a little bit more in depth here and highlights these stories. I mean, what was it specifically about these stories that you were inspired to simply say, well, this deserves more of a platform?
Yeah, well, when I came to coffee, I was doing a lot of studying, and it doesn't take a lot to realize the history of coffee. And the book kind of also points out, I had noticed I go to a lot of international meetings, symposiums, exhibitions, and I noticed that I wasn't meeting any Black Brazilians. And I thought it was strange because, Blacks in Brazil had such a prominent role in the country's history. If you pick up any general coffee history book, it talks about it was the enslavement of the West Africans taken to Brazil to get the crop started. And it was enslavement that put Brazil on top, being the largest producer back in the 1830s or mid 1800s, even up. I mean, and they still are today. Brazil is still the number one producer today. So, I was a little confused as to why I did not see Black Brazilians in prominent roles in the industry. And I started to ask the question, and I asked several individuals from different places, some European traders to even some African producers, asking them, when you travel to the country, to Brazil from East Africa, are you meeting with the Black Brazilians? And no one could say, I think you're mistaken. You've never heard about blah, blah, blah. And I just kept waiting for that. Every time I would make that statement, it felt like I was making the statement without full knowledge, but no one would ever stop me. So knowing their history is what inspired me. And I think on a few of my first trips there, I got a chance to sit with farmers and just kind of talk about, what it was like there. And yeah, it was interesting because most of the folks that I met, it was through the International Women's Coffee Alliance chapter in the Mantiqueira Mountains. I went to visit this time last year, around the same week, not last year, 5 years ago. And there were several women who were not landowners. They were workers, employees who came out to join the chapter, and they shared their stories. And I thought it was interesting that none of them owned land. And I left there thinking, without the enslavement, they're almost where they started in this industry, without ownership. And so when I met the families that are profiled in the book, I asked them, I said, where are the other Black Brazilian landowners? And they really, they didn't know anyone other than each other, in that region. So it's not very common. It's funny because, you see Black people working in coffee, and predominantly, of course, in Africa, and you see Black Brazilians working in coffee. And I think we just never think about where the ownership is, right? Where I don't think we think about that, I was looking at an advertisement from an international trading company not long ago, and it had a photo of the guy who's trading coffee in the country, and then it had only the hands of a Black woman holding the coffee cherries. And I mean, it was beautiful. She had beautiful hands, against these red cherries, beautiful Black hands with, colorful ornaments around her wrist and holding red cherries. And I thought, this is so indicative of how we see Black people in coffee as workers, as not the owners. And part of that kind of comes out in the book, in the interviews that I held. We talked about, even for the farmers, they're not thought to be the owners of the land that they own, and they grow great coffee. So, yeah.
So this is a generational thing that has people marginalized, according to tradition, it seems, and the ownership issue. It seems similar to women owning land in African producing countries. It seems like there's a parallel there. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of land ownership and why it makes a difference to Black Brazilians.
Yeah, there was Brazilian journalist reached out to me, and I had such a great time chatting with her. And she provided some statistics that she had been working on. And she said, only 8% of Black Brazilians own farmland. I was really shocked at that number. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really low. Until I looked at Black Americans who own land. That's around 1%, 1 to 2%. Huh. And owning land is wealth. It's how wealth is passed down, and it's the greatest opportunity for owning wealth is to own land. And so that opportunity has not been available so much for Black Americans as well as Black Brazilians. And, in Brazil, Blacks are a majority population, but only 8% own land. And that is crazy. I mean, in the US, we make up about a little bit over 13%. But still, those numbers are really low. And without owning land, it's really, really hard to accumulate any sort of wealth. So I think that's the biggest tragedy, Other ideas that kind of came out of my conversation on this subject had to do with the fact that if you don't own farmland, you might be more prone to go into a city where, there's less value for a living. Your quality of life is kind of stripped away a bit. There's a lot to think about there when you think about where the wealth ownership is.
Very little chance of disrupting the momentum of the status quo if you can't break into that kind of echelon of business. It makes the stories that you're highlighting here all the more remarkable because it's truly a triumph against the odds that you're just describing. It's a wonderful story to hear about.
It's a little bit of everything. I mean, how do you get from, and if we start at the beginning, how do you get from enslavement to years of sharecropping? And we're talking hundreds of years. How do you get from having nothing, basically? So that means that your labor you'll have to use the labor that you are producing wealth from or income from to try to invest in something that gives you wealth. Versus if you had land and you had wealth accumulation, you just continue to grow more and more. Then you can get a house, you can, do other things with that. But starting from having a job to trying to build wealth with that job and to do it with land, which isn't cheap. And in an environment where, you're competing, you're trying to grow coffee. Coffee is a high commodity item, right? And then you're in a country which is the largest producer of coffee in the world. So there are so many odds against you ever being able to grab hold to anything like this. It's quite remarkable that these two families were able to not only have land, but be able to produce coffee that made its way to specialty, which means higher price. But then there are also so many internal challenges as well. Once you have the land, then you have to be able to have the wherewithal to not have to sell your coffee as soon as it comes off the tree, right? Mm-hmm. To pay your debt. So you never make it to the external market. So there are so many things that keep farmers away from being able to make it into the marketplace. And that's any farmer. So now you take Black farmers, you take Black coffee farmers, very few who own land, who've been able to go from the sharecropping cycle. Even in the Peixoto family, it's a very, very large family. And some of the members are still sharecropping. So the entire family are not landowners. Some are still sharecropping. So it's a cycle where you never, ever get out. I remember a story that my mother told me about my grandfather. And she said that he had decided that he was going to leave a certain area where they were living. Her family was living when she was a child, because he said to the family, he said, we're never, ever going to get anywhere sharecropping. And because that was their life. And so they went someplace else where they could try to make a different living, and had some land. But then there was a challenge of clearing the land from trees. So there's so many obstacles to lose the land. In America, earlier, many years ago, many more Blacks own land. But just because of the challenges, you almost need wealth in order to maintain land, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's so many challenges that are up against individuals who are trying to, compete in this market just to have the assets, because you're not starting from the same point. So yeah, it was such a great story for me to, just sit back and try to absorb as much as I can. You can't ever fully understand someone else's story. But growing up on a farm in Arkansas with my family, starting from, enslavement to sharecropping to land ownership, my family owns land. There are similarities.
That's remarkable. And the trajectory, as rare as it is, I think it's tempting to have this be a feel-good story and gloss over the sheer will that it takes to just make that decision, because of not just the fact that the circumstances handed down generation after generation, but imagine the psychological chains, literally and figuratively, are present as well, where you discount your involvement in that tier of business, where you say, well, it's not for me because it's never been for us. And that, it seems, is one of the more remarkable parts of the story, is that these decisions were made. And it feels like when that decision is made, it needs to be met with people who will, like you've done here with this book and others in the industry are doing with other situations similar, to help that along. Or else, I mean, since it's up against such a huge mountain to climb, it needs help generating momentum just because there's so much it's pushing up against.
You're absolutely right about that. Oppression becomes almost self-perpetuating, in that you don't have to hold back people after a certain amount of time because mentally they're struggling from being held back for all those generations, that their vision for something different isn't even visible, right? So yeah, I truly understand what you're saying. And I believe that if you can have a few situations where others can light the pathway, so that those who are kind of on the sidelines and maybe thinking they could do something more, then it gives permission, right? When someone speaks up, many other folks come behind. Like, yeah, I feel the same way. And I see this as the same thing. Where there's opportunity to gain more information, to gain greater opportunities, everyone should be at those tables. But if they don't feel like they are welcomed at those tables, they don't show up. Or if they feel as though they're going to be cheated or, belittled, they just don't show up. So, I'm hopeful that this will help to open the doors for many other Black farmers, throughout Brazil and Latin America, and, folks who, not just Black farmers, but those who don't have an opportunity, those who haven't had an opportunity, those who have been oppressed, those who need an opportunity to show us their products and, build a different pathway.
The idea of providing an opportunity is similar to, in my thinking, it feels like visibility is almost a sort of a version of land ownership, because of the way that our world works now. The digital landscape has the ability to, not to be crass about it, but you could be like a pop superstar on YouTube because of visibility, and that directly impacts your opportunity in life. So today it feels like visibility is maybe not as appreciated for its power as it should be.
Yeah, for sure. Visibility, being visible. I also like to think about the term representation. I think that's a really important word and an important thing. we spend a lot of time talking about the lack of representation and how, well, if you don't see someone doing something, you have to see it to believe it. But the other side to the coin of that coin is when you don't see individuals doing certain things, those individuals become discounted or thought to be incompetent. And it's seen by everyone, even those individuals, as we were talking about earlier, but also by everyone in the environment, that everyone in the ecosphere, that's just not who you count on for this. Or, so I think that having visibility is important. Having visibility, representation, the ability to understand that people like me can do these things. We can grow great coffee. Yes, our ancestors started out on a different pathway, but my coffee on the table next to yours, you can't tell the difference. And so that's the part I think is just so remarkable. If you taste coffees from in a state that's been around for 100 years, or if you taste one of the coffees from the farmers that's written about in a book, you're not going to see that big of a difference. Mm-hmm. I had them on the table, and I just kept having these thoughts go through my mind of, the taste of the struggle, the taste of something. There's some word, there's something that's there for me. But I think it's triumph too. The fact that you can go in one generation to produce the quality and you can't build the wealth. You don't have the wherewithal. You're still very vulnerable. It's going to take a while, to have the stability, to build a customer base, to build the relationships and the networks that you need. But yeah, it just shows you what human will, human strength can do if given an opportunity.
Well, in terms of opportunity, you mentioned the cupping and the flavor, and so much of what we've built, the quote unquote third wave and modern mm-hmm. version of coffee on is a score of a coffee on the palate. And we're kind of, we try to, out of almost a virtuous attempt, to ignore the background of it and really just judge the quality, and that guides the market. But it feels like now, the more coffee I drink in my years, there's differences between roasters, of course, but we have a lot of roasters who are doing such an excellent job that now the decision is not so much whether or not you're going to get quality coffee. It's maybe the story and the what you're supporting with that coffee at this point. So we're kind of not moving away from taste. We're not saying taste doesn't matter, but it feels like now is a great opportunity to start being more aware of our purchasing decisions being guided based on what we want to support.
Right. Exactly. And that's why I felt like 2020 was really the year. We had time to sit back and think about a lot of things in 2020 with racial unrest in our country. I just felt like 2020 offered us a unique moment in time to bring stories like this to market. I had talked about this for a long time in a lot of different spaces, and I kind of got this glazed over look for most folks that that I brought it up to. But in 2020, it gave us an opportunity to hear. And that's why I knew, I said, we got to make this happen in 2020. We got to tell your story. We got to, import the coffee. We have to do all that we can, because this is the year to just step up a little bit. Because it's just like you say, producers have become more educated. When I look back 20 years, when I first started in coffee, you could tell where a coffee was from, just by based on the cup. And you would be right. Okay, this is Latin America. This is, this particular country. This is Africa. This is, Colombia. You knew. But now it's much more harder to do that because of all the different nuances in production and, the way the coffee is produced, the way just processed, everything is new now. So, you can taste a coffee from Latin America that has, the acidity and body of an African coffee, and the fruit notes and all those wonderful things. So now, once we've kind of explored all of the understanding that a great coffee can come from anywhere, then what? So then what is, who's producing the coffee? What's their story? And what is our connection to them? What is our understanding of them and their lives and their stories? And how do I further advance myself and my own beliefs through my purchases? So that's kind of where we are right now, I think. And it's an exciting time. It really is.
For better or for worse, we in the traditionally consuming countries have the keys to a lot of the possibilities that need to be used in favor of those who need them most. And in a sense, we can perpetuate it or we can interrupt it and redirect it. And I'm thinking about the fact that because it took so much effort to kind of rewrite the narrative in these stories and many others, a lot of the pressure to continue that momentum is on the shoulders of those who started it, but that doesn't seem fair, that they should be, have to produce coffee and support their families while also championing and waving the flag for change in a global scale. So I guess the question is, how do we, when we read these stories, when we consider what we've been talking about here, how do we come alongside, practically speaking, and shoulder the load also, instead of having it just be like, oh, it's a great story, I hope they keep going. And, what's our responsibility and how do we be successful in that for their benefit?
Yeah. I always believe that, when you're buying something, you have power. And there's a lot of coffee that we must buy in order to meet the needs of American consumers, right? And the consumers who rely on U.S. roasters and companies. We have a robust industry. We have the largest value coffee market in the world. So we are in such a unique place. And to use that power, is just, it would be incredible. I think that, if the U.S., if we were to use our buying power of coffee in a positive way, we could change, we could make tremendous change. As far as, these issues aren't just my issues because I'm a person of color, because I'm Black. These issues don't just belong to the Peixotos, we're kind of all in this together. The book kind of talks about some of that. There are others in the book that I don't even want to call them allies, because I don't know how I always feel about that word. But sometimes it's not possible to get to the next level unless you have the support of others. And sometimes it's hard to take in. But I know, even if I look back in my own life, I know that my family would not have made it to just stepping to the next level had it not been just someone. And that person wasn't a person of color. That person wasn't Black. That may have been a white man who said, hey, I want to help. I see something for you. I see an opportunity for you that I would like to engage in. And I believe that in the book, there's a nearby farm that's well over 100 years old. And they kind of brought in the families that are in the book and shared their knowledge, and they worked together as a team. So this isn't just those who have been disenfranchised problem, because when you talk to the other individuals in the book, when you read their comments, you see that they were carrying a weight, a feeling of debt, that they wanted to provide support in a way that allows others to thrive. And I think when I just think about my own life, and getting around the holiday season, around Christmas time, it always makes you feel better. You always feel more complete when you care about someone else. And I think that that's kind of what this is really about. Do you care about someone else enough to stop a major empire, whether it's a farm or a roasting plant or a retail operation? Do you care enough just to look around and say, who else should have an opportunity? Who else would add value to this industry that's not here? Because we really don't know. They're just not even here. But often I think what we do is that when individuals aren't there, when people aren't in the equation, if it's all men, or there's no diversity, we make up in our mind reasons as to why that's the case. So I think 2020 has given us a chance to stop reasoning that, to stop making sense of nonsense, to say that everybody wants the same thing in life. These families did not want to spend generations after generation sharecropping. That was not necessarily their choice. It was what they had to do to get to where they were. So, I just hope moving forward, I just hope we as a people have our eyes open a little bit greater towards equity, towards inclusion, towards it's more than just me. So, I think it's a long answer, but we're in this together, and it means something to you. It means as much to you. It means as much as to what's in your cup right now as it does mine, that everyone is empowered, that everyone is at the table, that equity is there especially for those who gave their lives on the front end of this industry, right?
Yeah, well said. A lot of times when we have this conversation, we talk about this, and there's this idea of charity that kind of is in the back of the mind, where it says, well, I'm just going to do something nice because it's nice to do, and not let it bother me too much. But we act like we are the initiators of it. And as you're speaking, I'm just realizing how much everyone in the coffee industry has been afforded the opportunity to even be coffee people, because of coffee people of color, because of the things that have already been invested. So it's definitely not charitable in that sense. It's, if anything, it's reciprocal. And I love how you're bringing that in this together as the mantra of 2020. We are looking at small businesses next to us and trying to support them. And in a more global economy, it just makes sense that we extend that out to those who make our livelihoods possible.
Right. What's interesting, when you look at the history of coffee, especially and I don't mean to pick on Brazil, but when you look at the history of coffee, because enslavement was everywhere, and enslavement was in the U.S. It just wasn't coffee; it was cotton. But there was 160 years of enslaved. There was a period of 160 years from the time coffee was introduced until slavery was abolished. That's 160 years. If you look at the time when slavery was abolished to now, that's been 132 years. So Brazil has produced coffee a shorter amount of time, outside of slavery than they did in slavery.
Wow.
And so how do we so quickly forget? How do we so quickly just say that's a dark past and continue on? What's the limit? 5 years? That we just don't even have to think about what it was? I don't know. But it seems we're not even at 50% of the time. So it's something to think about. I mean, I don't know. It's just, we really want to just move on, and we don't want to look at our own past. And I do want to say the book really isn't so much focused on all of my studying and thinking and my own personal journey about working in agriculture and enslavement and where I am today and where the farmers are today. The stories are more like they're profiling the people and who they are in their greatest moments today, because that's what they deserve. They carry the weight of whatever it is of oppression from generations past, right? But who they are in the book is victors. They're triumph. They're role models. And I struggle, and I hope I succeeded with not, making it the heavy book about, coming from, the depths of the enslaved, but kind of starting where they are now, because, I felt like their stories and their product needed to be portrayed in the right light. And when I looked at the pictures, I thought, this is truly amazing. They look like the owners that they truly are. They look like they're in the position that they should be in.
Well, I will say that in my reading of it, it was a celebration of their lives. And I'm so grateful that you put this book out, especially now as we gauge what the next year is going to look like. It's a great thing for everyone to read and get inspired by as we consider what we're going to do with our opportunities, going into 2021. And you've done a great work here, and really appreciate you being on the show again. It's always so great to talk to you. How can people buy this book? Where can we find out more information?
Yeah, it's on our website. You can buy it on our website. And the really, really cool thing about it is the proceeds from the sale of the book will go to the farmers that are highlighted in the book, as well as the Coffee Coalition for Racial Equity. So it's doing really good work. BD Imports donated the cost of printing the books, and Roast Magazine donated the cost of publishing the book and putting it together, designing it. And we kind of donated everything else. So it's a really feel-good thing. It's beautiful, on your coffee table. The pictures are great. We had a professional photographer to go out and take the pictures. And yeah, it's something I'm really proud of. There are a few things I'm proud of that I can truthfully say I'm proud of. I always push myself, like, you could have done better, you could have done more, but I have to say, when I look at the book, this is something I'm proud of.
As you should be. It's amazing. Thank you again, Phyllis. This has been great to talk to you. Thanks for the work you've been doing. And again, amazing to have you on the show.
Chris, thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. It's always great to talk to you. And I think 2021 is going to be a better year.
I receive that. Let's do it.
Yes. All right. Take care.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that episode provoked some thought in you and created maybe even more questions than answers. I mean, I think there's a lot of clarity that was gained as a result of hearing from Phyllis and these topics, that it really drives home the point that we have a responsibility to reach out and come alongside people. Just like Phyllis was saying, we're in this together. And as we reinforce that togetherness as we reach out with generosity and caring for others around us, we are contributing to rewriting the narrative that so many marginalized communities have lived under for generations. And it takes more than just one generation to make a difference. And it does take all of us to make a permanent difference. And one of the ways that you can do that, of course, is to buy this book. You can go to bdimports.com to do that. The proceeds go to the farmers in the book. But beyond that, we can take an assessment of what kind of power we possess as business owners, as leaders, to leverage our position for the benefit of other people. Leading into the holiday season, leading into a new year, let's work on creative ways to tangibly extend hope to those who need it most. And a big thank you to Phyllis Johnson for joining us on the show, inspiring us to take action through this book and your other works. We're so thankful for you and the difference that you are making in the coffee industry. If you all have any questions, comments, or feedback about this or other episodes, you can email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I'd love to hear from all of you in the Keys to the Shop listening audience. And with that, that is the end of our show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I hope we all really got something great out of the conversation with Phyllis Johnson. And also, as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.